For ages, Officer Elias Vance and Officer Kian Shaw operated with impunity, turning every routine stop into a potential nightmare, making every formal complaint vanish into thin air. They built their kingdom on a foundation of fear, utterly convinced that their badges rendered them gods among mortals, untouchable and absolute. That is, until they chose to torment the wrong man, a black man serenely walking his German shepherd through a sun-dappled neighborhood, a man they saw as just another number, another face to be bent to their will. But when this man didn't cower, when he dared to question their supposed authority, they did what they always did. They escalated. Harsh words curdled into threats, threats bled into violence, and when his loyal dog took a single protective step forward, one of them felt the cold, familiar weight of his pistol. Now, Corbin Thorne, a former Delta Force operator with nothing left in the world to lose, is coming for them. Those officers believed they understood the nature of power, convinced their uniforms were shields of invincibility, but they have no concept, no idea at all of the storm that is about to break upon them. Justice is coming, and it will be as swift as it is agonizing. Before we continue, let us know where on this spinning globe you are watching from, and be sure you're subscribed for what comes next. The afternoon sun bled long, inky shadows across the quiet suburban street, its golden light splintering through the canopy of leaves that lined the immaculate sidewalks. Kaiser's paws made a soft, rhythmic tapping against the concrete, his sharp ears twitching at the distant drone of a lawnmower and the sporadic chirps of birds nestled unseen in the branches. The leash hung slack in Corbin's hand, the powerful German shepherd moving in perfect fluid sync with his handler, alert yet utterly at ease. It was a flawless day, one of those increasingly rare moments when the world itself seemed to hold its breath, simple and still. Corbin drew in a slow, deep breath, inhaling the crisp, clean scent of freshly mown grass, feeling the immense pressure of the day begin to recede, just slightly. This walk was his ritual, a small, grounding pleasure after long, grueling weeks, spent on the road for his work. This last trip had kept him away longer than usual, overseeing high-stakes security operations in volatile territories overseas. Now that he was finally home, he craved nothing more than the simple things: a silent walk with Kaiser, the gentle warmth of the sun on his skin, the profound comfort of his own space. And yet, even as he tried to sink into the moment, he could feel the eyes on him. It was a constant, a familiar pressure. A car would slow to a crawl at a nearby intersection. A curtain in a second-story window would tremble with unseen movement. A jogger would hesitate for a beat too long before continuing on their path. Corbin had forged most of his adult life in environments of extreme risk, places where survival was a game of reading a situation nanoseconds before it detonated. Out there, it was about identifying overt threats, enemy combatants, hidden IEDs, the unseen dangers that coiled in the shadows. Here, in the very place that was meant to be his sanctuary, the threat was different, more subtle, less direct, but no less real. He felt it in the way a stranger's gaze would linger on him for a fraction of a second too long, in the way a woman might clutch her purse a little tighter as he passed, in the way a man walking a golden retriever had deliberately crossed the street last week, his eyes fixed on anything but Corbin. He had done nothing but exist, and still that existence was enough to set people on edge. The irony was a bitter pill. He had dedicated more than a decade of his life to the most elite counterterrorism unit on the planet, the U.S. Army's Delta Force. He had operated in places where a wrong turn down an alley meant you never turned back out, where trust was a currency he simply couldn't afford. He had dismantled the networks of warlords, taken down terrorist cells, and protected people who would never even know their lives had been in peril. And yet here, in his own neighborhood, a place he had paid for with his own blood, sweat, and sacrifice, He was the one who didn't belong. A car rounded the corner up ahead, creeping forward at a speed that felt unnervingly deliberate. Corbin's eyes shifted toward it, a cold sense of certainty already settling in his gut. He knew what he was about to see. The stark black and white paint, the unmistakable silhouette of a police cruiser. A low, humming growl rumbled in Kaiser's chest, so soft that only Corbin could have possibly detected it. He gave the leash a minute tug. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice a calm, soothing current. Kaiser obeyed instantly, his head tilting toward Corbin, reading the unreadable expression on his handler's face. The cruiser slowed as it drew alongside them, perfectly matching his walking pace. Then the voice came. "Afternoon." Corbin halted, his stride turning toward the vehicle with a measured, fluid motion. His posture was open, his expression neutral. No tension, no challenge. "Afternoon, officer," he replied, keeping his tone impeccably polite. Always polite. The driver, Officer Vance, leaned against the open window, his face a mask of indifference. But his eyes were sharp, assessing, cataloging, searching. His partner, Officer Shaw, had already exited the vehicle, his boots crunching on the pavement, as he positioned himself a few calculated steps away, just close enough to feel menacing, just far enough to claim plausible deniability. They weren't here for a friendly conversation. "This your neighborhood, then?" Vance asked, tilting his head with a slight challenging angle. His voice was casual, far too casual. "Yes, sir," Corbin answered, without a flicker of hesitation. Vance's lips twitched, a fleeting sign of annoyance that he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted. "That's strange. Don't believe I've seen you around here before." Corbin offered a small, courteous nod. "I travel frequently for my work. Security contracting overseas. I just returned a few days ago." Shaw scoffed under his breath, shaking his head. "Security contracting? That just a high-dollar way of saying mercenary?" Corbin let out a soft, disarming chuckle, as if the insult hadn't landed at all. Let them believe they had the upper hand. "Not quite," he said, maintaining a friendly tone. "Private security for high-risk zones? I consult for various agencies and corporations, help train their teams for emergency response protocols." Vance nodded slowly, but something in his expression was off, a subtle dissonance. "Well," he said, shifting in his seat, "we received a call about someone looking suspicious in the area. Figured we should come check it out." Corbin raised a single eyebrow, but kept his tone perfectly even. "I see. I wasn't aware that walking my dog qualified as suspicious." Vance smirked. "You'd be surprised what makes people nervous these days." Shaw took a slow, deliberate step closer, his gaze dropping to Kaiser, who remained standing calmly, but was now watching the officers with a quiet, focused intensity. "That's a big dog," Shaw commented, his interest feigned. "Is he trained?" "Yes, sir." "Trained for what?" Corbin let the question hang in the air for a moment, his relaxed stance unwavering. He knew this script by heart. "Obedience, protection. He's exceptionally disciplined." Shaw nodded slowly, as if weighing the words for hidden meaning. Then Vance shifted the conversation. "Gonna need to see some identification." It was not a request. Corbin knew his rights. He could ask for cause, he could refuse, he could make a stand. But he also knew exactly what kind of men he was facing. "Of course," he said smoothly, already reaching into his jacket with a slow, deliberate movement. Kaiser let out a barely audible rumble, shifting a fraction of an inch closer. Vance's eyes darted toward the dog, and Corbin didn't miss the way his fingers twitched near the handle of his weapon. "Whoa, there," Shaw muttered, his voice suddenly a little sharper. "You might want to get that thing under control." Corbin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained level. "Kaiser is fine. He's well trained," Vance chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, we'll see about that." Something in the way he said it, a chilling undertone, made Corbin's stomach clench. It was the tone, the unspoken promise of what they intended to happen next. He drew his wallet out, holding it up with care. Vance barely glanced at it before waving a dismissive hand. "Nah, I think we're going to need you to step over here. Just have a few questions for you." Corbin exhaled slowly, carefully. Don't give them a reason. He gave Kaiser's leash the slightest tug, a silent command to stand down. Then he stepped forward, and in that single moment, the entire world changed. Corbin stepped forward, moving. With a deliberate calm, his wallet still held out for them to inspect. The leash for Kaiser remained steady in his grip, his posture unchanged. Yet the dog's body had gone rigid, an almost imperceptible shift that only Corbin would recognize. He could feel the oppressive weight of the officer's scrutiny, the way their eyes dissected his every movement. How Vance's smirk was a thin veneer over the sharp predatory edge of control he was desperate to exert. Shaw took the wallet with a lazy, arrogant air, flipping it open as if he fully expected to find something incriminating inside. His fingers traced over the identification card, his lips twisting into a sneer before he angled it toward Vance. "Well, look what we have here," Shaw mused, shaking his head. "We've got ourselves a genuine American hero." Vance accepted the wallet, glancing at it with a look of profound disinterest. "Delta Force, huh?" His voice was laced with that same casual disdain, as if even Corbin's decorated service to his country was insufficient to earn a shred of basic human respect. "That's supposed to impress me?" Corbin offered no reaction. He had learned years ago that men like this fed on reactions. They craved them. Any sign of irritation, any hint of defiance, would only be an excuse for them to push harder, to escalate further. So he remained as he was, calm, polite, an immovable object. "It means I've served," he stated, his tone level and measured. "And now I work in security consulting, as I mentioned." Vance let out a small, dismissive chuckle, shaking his head, before handing the wallet back in a way that forced Corbin to step even closer to retrieve it. It was a subtle gesture, but Corbin recognized it for what it was, a petty power play. He took his wallet, tucking it back into his jacket without breaking eye contact. "That's so," Vance drawled, "because what I'm looking at is a guy wandering around a neighborhood where nobody seems to know him. And you know how it is. The folks around here, they get a little jumpy when they see someone they don't think belongs." They weren't even attempting subtlety anymore. Corbin tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I do belong. I live here." "Yeah?" Vance folded his arms, stepping a fraction of an inch closer. "Then you won't have a problem answering. A few more questions, will you?" Corbin held his ground, neither retreating nor advancing. "I believe I've already answered them." Shaw scoffed under his breath, adjusting his duty belt. "I don't know, Vance. Something about his attitude just doesn't sit right with me. Guy seems a little tense, don't you think?" Vance smirked. "Yeah, almost like he's got something to hide." Corbin drew a slow, centering breath, resisting the instinctual urge to retort. He had faced down more hostile situations than he could count, had confronted warlords, insurgents, men with explosives strapped to their chests, enemies who wanted him dead and possessed every means to make it a reality. Yet, in all those years, he had never felt a restraint quite like this tightening around him, like a vice. Because here, in his own country, in the very community he had fought to protect, he wasn't viewed as a man who had served, not as a citizen with rights. He was a threat, a problem to be managed. And Kaiser knew it. The dog had been trained to read situations, to recognize escalating tension, to detect when his handler was in imminent danger. And right now, though Corbin remained perfectly still, Kaiser could sense that something was fundamentally wrong. His ears were erect, his gaze locked onto the officers, his body language shifting from relaxed to hyper-alert. Vance noticed. "You got that thing under control?" he asked, motioning toward Kaiser with a tilt of his chin. Corbin tightened his grip ever so slightly on the leash. "He's fine. He's trained." Shaw narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, trained for what?" Corbin kept his expression neutral. Protection? Security? He follows my commands. Vance let out a low whistle, shaking his head. A dog like that, all trained up to attack. That's a dangerous thing to be walking around these parts, don't you think? He's not trained to attack, Corbin corrected, his patience wearing dangerously thin despite his best efforts. He's trained to defend. Yeah? Vance's smirk widened. And what exactly does he think you need defending from, huh? The words hung between them, heavy and loaded. Corbin said nothing. Shaw exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. I don't know, Vance. Guy's got a big dog, won't answer our question, seems real on edge. He took another step forward, this time intentionally closing the space between them. I think maybe we need to go ahead and bring him in, just to be safe. Corbin could feel Kaiser's tension spike, the leash pulling just slightly as the German shepherd adjusted his stance, muscles coiled, prepared. He could sense what was happening, could feel the shift, the critical moment just before a situation spirals into chaos. You don't need to do that, Corbin said, his voice carefully measured. I've cooperated. I've shown you my ID. There's no cause for detainment. Shaw gave an exaggerated shrug. Maybe. But see, I just don't like the way this feels, and I think we need to make sure everything checks out. Vance tilted his head. I think we're going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. Just for our safety, you understand. Corbin's jaw clenched, but his voice remained calm. I haven't done anything. Yeah, Vance smiled, stepping closer. Then you won't mind. It was a test, a deliberate, calculated provocation. And then Shaw reached out, his hand clamping onto Corbin's wrist, firm and insistent. Kaiser's snarl ripped through the air like a blade. Instantly, both officers' hands dropped to their weapons. Corbin moved without thinking, a fluid shift of his arm redirecting Shaw's grip without force, stepping back even as he held Kaiser's leash firm, grounding the dog before he could lunge. Whoa, 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 Corbin said quickly, his voice calm but sharp with authority. He's reacting to your aggression. Stand down! But they weren't listening. Shaw had already drawn his firearm, his face twisted into an expression Corbin had seen 1,000 times before, fear masquerading as control. Get that dog back, Vance barked, stepping away, his own hand hovering over his holster. Kaiser was still in place, but his entire body was taut, his instincts screaming, his eyes locked on the men who now posed a clear and present danger to his handler. Corbin's pulse slowed, his training kicking in, every variable flashing through his mind. In an instant, this was not going to end well. Corbin raised his hand slowly, palms facing outward, his voice even, firm, controlled. Listen, officers, I live here. You saw my ID, my address is on it. There is no issue. Kaiser remained motionless, but Corbin could feel the leash tightening in his grip, his dog sensing every ounce of his unease, every shift in the atmosphere, every note of tension vibrating through the air. This wasn't just some routine stop. It had never been about that. And now, with hands hovering near holsters, with voices sharpening, with the slow, creeping dread rising in Corbin's chest, it was terrifyingly clear that these men had already decided how this encounter was going to end. Vance's smirk had vanished, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Then, control your damn dog. Corbin exhaled slowly, keeping his hands raised, refusing to let the irritation break through, refusing to give them even an inch of what they so desperately wanted. Kaiser is under control. He hasn't moved. He is on a leash. He's trained and he hasn't attacked. The only reason he is reacting is because you... I don't give a damn what you think, boy, Shaw snapped, his voice cutting through the space between them like the crack of a whip. I said, control your damn dog. Corbin's fingers twitched, but not from anger. No, he had buried that emotion deep inside, locked it away in the part of him that had learned long ago that losing his temper in moments like these was a death sentence. It was discipline, calculation, and training that told him that right now, every movement, every breath, Every single thing he did was a potential trigger for something he could never undo. "Officers, please. I am complying," Corbin said carefully, lowering his voice just a fraction, trying to bleed some of the heat out of the moment. "You saw my ID. You know I live here. My dog is restrained. I am not resisting. So tell me, what exactly do you need from me right now?" Vance took a step closer, his hand still twitching near his holster, his expression twisting into something Corbin recognized instantly. He wasn't just looking for compliance. He was hunting for an excuse. "You think this is some kind of game?" Vance sneered, his voice rising now. "You think we give a damn what you think? I don't care who you are, where you live, or what you do. Right now you're a threat. And that mutt of yours is a damn liability." Shaw moved another inch forward, his boots grinding against the pavement. "You want to keep talking, or you want to do what the hell you're told?" Kaiser let out a low, warning growl. Corbin shifted his weight slightly, angling himself just enough to keep the officers in his view while also maintaining his control over Kaiser. "You're escalating this situation. Officers, I am standing still. My dog is standing still. The only aggression here is coming from you." "Stand down now," Shaw barked, his voice sharp, commanding, filled with something just a little too eager. Corbin's heart pounded, not with fear but with frustration, with the suffocating knowledge that there was nothing he could say, no amount of reason, that would shift the destructive path they had chosen for this moment. Vance gestured aggressively at the ground. "Put that mutt down. Make him sit. Now." Corbin kept his movements slow, calculated. He turned his head just slightly, giving a quiet, controlled command. "Kaiser, down." Immediately, Kaiser lowered himself to the ground, his body stiff but obedient, his ears flicking back slightly, sensing the forced nature of the order. Shaw scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, now you want to listen." Vance wasn't satisfied, his hand dropping lower toward his holster. "Shorten the leash. Make sure he can't move." Corbin's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, gripping the leash closer, keeping. Kaiser locked in place, his breathing steady, his focus unwavering. Vance exchanged a glance with Shaw. Something silent passed between them, something unspoken but heavy. An agreement. A decision. Shaw exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off tension. "We're done playing around. Turn around. Hands behind your back." Corbin stiffened, his voice dropping to something lower, quieter, but still controlled. "I've done nothing wrong." Vance's smirk returned. "Yeah, and yet, here we are." Corbin didn't move. He knew what would happen if he turned around. The moment he gave them his back, he'd be in cuffs, shoved against the pavement, and whatever excuse they wanted to use afterward would be built on the fiction that he had resisted, even though he hadn't. "Turn around," Shaw ordered again, taking a step forward. Kaiser let out a deep, rolling growl. Both officers' hands shot to their guns. "Control your damn dog," Shaw shouted. Corbin's voice snapped, sharp and authoritative. "He is controlled." "Not good enough," Vance yelled back, his fingers tightening on his weapon. Corbin felt the shift, the moment before the moment. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. The air seemed to still. The heat of the sun felt suddenly distant, the world, shrinking to just this space, this street, these men who had never once intended to let him walk away with his dignity intact. Shaw moved first, his hand jerking toward his gun. Kaiser reacted before Corbin could even process the movement. A defensive instinct, a split-second reaction, the very thing the officers had been waiting for. A single bark, sharp, quick, a warning. Then the shift of muscle as Kaiser tensed. Corbin barely had time to process the movement before it happened. The gunshot rang out, splitting the air like a crack of thunder. The leash jerked violently in Corbin's hand, and then Kaiser stumbled. The world slowed to a crawl, the sound of blood roaring in Corbin's ears drowning out everything else. The officers' shouts, the distant noise of a car engine, the voices of unseen neighbors who had been watching from the safety of their windows. All he saw was Kaiser's body jerking back, the shock in his dark brown eyes, the way his legs faltered beneath him, as his body gave way. No, Corbin's voice didn't even sound like his own. His knees hit the pavement before he even realized he had moved. Kaiser collapsed against him, his weight heavy, far too heavy, and Corbin's hands were suddenly slick with warmth, with life slipping away far too fast. A low, pained whimper escaped from Kaiser's throat, his breathing shallow, uneven. Shaw still had his gun raised, his face a twisted mask of self-satisfaction and mock surprise. Vance simply shook his head, exhaling through his nose. Told you he was a liability. Corbin barely heard them. Everything inside him went perfectly still. Corbin barely registered the voices swirling around him, barely processed the shuffle of boots on pavement or the crackle of a distant radio. His entire world had contracted to the warm, crumpling weight in his arms, to the sharp, ragged breaths tearing through Kaiser's throat, to the way his dog, his companion, his brother-in-arms, his protector, was fighting against the inevitable, refusing to let go even as his body failed him. "Stay with me," Corbin whispered, his voice raw, hoarse, breaking at the edges. His hands pressed desperately against the wound, warm blood seeping between his fingers, pooling on the pavement, staining his clothes, his skin, the world around. Him turning red as his vision blurred with something hotter, darker, more consuming than anything he had ever known. "I got you, boy. Stay with me, please." Kaiser's eyes were still fixed on him, still alert, still searching his face as if awaiting a command, waiting for direction. But there was no battlefield here, no mission, no threat to eliminate. There was just pain, just confusion, just the deep, unspoken bond between them unraveling too fast for Corbin to stop it. He could feel the tremors racking Kaiser's body, the rapid, panicked rise and fall of his chest, the small, strangled sounds escaping from his throat, as if he wanted to respond, to tell Corbin he was still fighting, that he would always fight. But the strength was fading, slipping like sand through Corbin's grasp, like something he had no power to hold on to. "You're okay. You're okay," Corbin muttered, his hands shaking as he stroked Kaiser's head, his fingers slipping over the damp fur, cradling his dog's face as if he could keep him grounded, keep him here. "You're strong, buddy. Just hold on. Just, damn it. Kaiser, don't you quit on me." The officers were talking. He could hear their voices, but they didn't matter. Their words were nothing but distant, meaningless noise, like the buzzing of insects, irrelevant and hollow against the sound of Kaiser's slowing breaths, against the pulse of rage rising in Corbin's chest like a tidal wave, violent and uncontainable. Then Kaiser let out a final, shallow exhale, and his body went still. Something inside Corbin snapped. He lifted his head, his eyes burning, blood smeared across his hands, his forearms, his clothes. His breathing hitched, then transformed into something deeper, rougher, jagged with fury. His entire body trembled, but it wasn't with grief. It was something else, something hotter, something breaking loose from the deepest part of him, something primal, something that had been chained down for far too damn long. "You!" His voice was a growl, a threat, an unfiltered burst of hatred coiling around his words, barely contained, barely human. He surged upward, pushing away from Kaiser's still body, his hands clenching into fists, his entire stance shifting, rigid, braced, ready. "You killed him." Shaw flinched, but Vance just sneered, shaking his head as if dismissing a child's tantrum. "That's on you, big guy. Should have controlled your damn dog." The world turned red. Corbin lunged, not thinking, not planning, just moving, just acting, just surrendering to the raw, vicious, undeniable fury tearing through every inch of him. He wanted to feel his fists sink into flesh, wanted to break something, wanted to tear them apart the way they had just torn his world apart. The sharp, brutal snap of electricity slammed into his spine. His entire body seized, muscles locking, nerves igniting in blinding, unbearable pain as the taser's voltage ripped through him, stealing his breath, stealing his strength, sending him crashing back to the ground. His body convulsed, pain exploding through every nerve, his vision white-hot with agony, his jaw locking as the current overpowered every thought, every instinct, leaving him helpless, thrashing against the pavement, unable to move, unable to do anything but feel. And then they were on him, boots pressing against his arms, against his back, pistols leveled at his head, voices shouting, demanding, barking orders, like he was some wild animal they needed to put down. "Stay down! Don't you move! Hands behind!" "You're back! Now!" Corbin gasped, choking on his own breath, rage and grief crashing into his chest like a wrecking ball. Every part of him screamed to fight back, to break free, to do something, anything but submit. But they had guns. They had already killed Kaiser. And if he moved again, if he gave them even the slightest excuse, they would do the same to him. His body trembled, his muscles still twitching from the taser, but he forced his arms behind his back, his fists clenching so tightly his nails dug into his own palms, hard enough to draw blood. The weight of a knee pressed between his shoulder blades, grinding him down, suffocating, humiliating. "Yeah, that's right," Vance muttered, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "That's where you belong." Corbin let out a raw, guttural scream. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was rage, pure and undiluted, thick with grief, with helplessness, with a fury so deep it felt like it would burn him alive. "You killed him!" he roared, his voice cracking, breaking, shattering under the weight of everything that was spiraling out of control. "You murdered him!" His voice was hoarse, but he kept yelling, kept screaming, as if he could force the world to listen, as if he could undo what had just been done through sheer force of will. But no one listened. Vance yanked him up by his arms, the metal of the cuffs biting into his wrists, his grip rough, punishing. Shaw holstered his weapon, watching with an expression somewhere between amusement and indifference as Corbin was dragged toward the squad car, his body still trembling with unspent rage, with grief too big to contain. He fought against it, against the hands, shoving him forward, against the injustice burning like fire in his throat, against the unbearable reality that Kaiser was gone, that his best friend had just died in his arms, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. But the metal door slammed shut behind him, and he was trapped, alone. The sound of his own ragged, furious breathing was the only thing left. And then slowly, something else settled in. Something colder, something sharper, something that felt like steel locking into place. They thought this was over. They thought they had won. But Corbin wasn't just some man on a walk with his dog. He was Delta Force, and one way or another, he was going to burn their world to the ground. The cold steel of the handcuffs dug into Corbin's wrists, biting deeper with every lurch of the vehicle as it rumbled down the road, its sirens silent, its passengers indifferent to the man shackled in the back. His chest still heaved, his breath uneven, his pulse a war drum hammering against his ribs, his entire body a raw, frayed nerve that hadn't stopped vibrating since the moment that gunshot had shattered the world. His fingers twitched against the unforgiving metal, muscles still spasming from the lingering effects of the taser, the aftershocks of forced compliance still pulsing through his veins. His jaw ached from how tightly he had been clenching his teeth, his throat raw from the screams they had ignored, from the pure, undiluted rage that had poured from his soul, and yet had done nothing to change the fact that Kaiser was gone. He could still feel the weight of him, still see those dark eyes filled with loyalty, filled with trust, looking at him in those final moments, waiting for a command, waiting for him to fix it, to protect him, to stop the inevitable from happening. He had never felt so utterly powerless. The cruiser jerked to a stop. The doors swung open, and Vance's hand wrapped around his arm like he was dragging a corpse from a ditch, yanking him forward with a force that sent a jolt of pain shooting through his shoulders. The moment his boots hit the pavement, Corbin forced his body to steady itself, forced the tremor in his limbs to vanish, forced himself to bury the raw, burning storm still clawing at his insides. Not here, not now. They wanted a reaction. They'd gotten one when Kaiser fell. They would not get another. Shaw smirked as he stepped out, adjusting his belt with a casual arrogance, the kind of swagger that comes from knowing you can take a life in broad daylight and suffer no consequences. "Welcome to your new home for the night," he drawled, giving Corbin's shoulder a hard shove toward the station doors. "Try not to get too comfortable." Corbin didn't respond. He kept his posture straight, his eyes forward, his mind reeling, calculating, searching for a way through the fog of rage that had settled in his chest, like a dying fire, still smoldering, waiting to ignite. The booking process was a blur of cold fingers snapping off his cuffs, of ink pressed against his skin, of fluorescent lights humming above him as the weight of everything settled in his bones. His mugshot was taken with Kaiser's blood still. On his clothes, on his hands, the evidence of his loss turned into nothing more than another box checked on a form that meant nothing. They led him to a holding cell, a small, stale room that smelled of sweat and old regret, its walls lined with the ghosts of men who had sat there before him, staring at the same cracks in the ceiling, wondering how they had ended up on the wrong side of justice. Corbin didn't sit. He didn't pace. He didn't close his eyes. He waited. Time blurred, minutes bleeding into hours. The anger didn't fade, but it shifted, cooling, hardening into something different, something more dangerous. And then the door opened. A familiar voice, firm, clipped, burning with barely restrained fury, cutting through the silence. "Get your damn hands off of him." Serafina. Corbin exhaled slowly as his sister stormed into the room, her heels striking. The tile-like gunfire, her presence a force of nature, that even the officers escorting her seemed reluctant to challenge. She was dressed in full defense mode, power suit, sharp angles, a glare so sharp it could slice through bone. "You're done holding him," she snapped, shoving a stack of papers into the nearest officer's chest without looking at him. "Unless you want the lawsuit of the century, I suggest you unchain your egos from this moment and let him walk out of here." Vance appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, amusement flickering in his gaze. "Relax, sweetheart," he said, his voice oozing false charm. "We were just having a conversation with your brother. Had a little misunderstanding earlier." Serafina turned so fast her hair barely had time to catch up. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her tone a loaded weapon. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Shaw leaned against the doorway, grinning. "He got aggressive, ma'am. We had to make sure things didn't escalate." Serafina's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You mean you shot his dog, assaulted him, and threw him in a cell because you thought he looked out of place in his own neighborhood?" Vance shrugged. "Could have gone worse." The temperature in the room dropped. Corbin finally spoke, his voice quieter than it had been all night, but laced with something that made even Vance's smirk flicker. "It will." For the first time, the officers hesitated just for a second. Then Vance snorted, shaking his head. "Take him home, counselor. But I'd tell him to keep his head down if I were you. This city isn't too kind to troublemakers." Serafina's eyes burned, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned to Corbin, her fingers wrapping around his wrist, her grip firm, steady, the first anchor he had felt since this nightmare began. "Let's go," she said softly. Corbin followed her out, past the other officers who barely spared. Him a glance, past the walls that had already erased him, past the men who believed they had won. The night air hit his skin, but it didn't feel freeing. Nothing did. Serafina exhaled, rubbing a hand over her face before turning to him, her expression shifting from fury to something heavier, something laced with grief. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know what he meant to you." Corbin's jaw tensed, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. The words weren't there, not in a language that could express what had been ripped from him. But Serafina wasn't finished. "You need to let me handle this," she continued, her voice firm, pleading. "You need to let me take this through the courts, through the media, through every legal damn avenue we have. Do not—" "It won't work," Corbin said quietly. Serafina hesitated. "Corbin, It won't work. And they both knew it. The police owned the system. They controlled the narrative. They had already set it in motion, already buried any chance of accountability beneath layers of bureaucracy and false reports and manufactured justifications. The courts wouldn't save him. The law wouldn't save him. Justice wasn't coming, not the kind Serafina was hoping for, and so Corbin did something he hadn't done in years. He let go of the idea that the system would protect him, and he let something else settle in, something colder, something inevitable. Days later, the house was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, not the sort of quiet that came with solitude or rest. This was absence. The kind of silence that clawed at the edges of a man's mind, that sat heavy in the air, pressing in from all sides, the kind that made the world feel off balance, like something had been torn away and left nothing but a void in its place. Corbin sat at his kitchen table, staring at his hands, his fingers resting loosely around a coffee mug he hadn't touched. Kaiser's leash sat coiled on the counter, the absence of weight at his side, of movement in the room, of quiet, steady breaths that weren't his own, leaving a hollow so deep it felt like the floor itself might give way beneath him. Serafina stood by the window, arms crossed, watching him carefully. "You haven't slept." Corbin didn't answer. "You haven't eaten either," she added, her voice soft, careful. Still no response. Serafina sighed, dragging a hand down her face before stepping closer. "I know what you're thinking." That made him exhale, a slow, humorless sound that barely registered as a laugh. He finally looked up at her, his eyes dark, tired, hollow in a way that hadn't been there before. "Do you?" Serafina hesitated, something unreadable flickering across her face. They had always been close, had always understood each other in ways most siblings didn't. But now, as she looked at him, as she saw the profound shift that had taken place, she wasn't sure if she recognized what she saw. "I know you," she said carefully. "I know how you operate. I know that if something doesn't make sense, if something is broken, you fix it. If there's an enemy, you eliminate it. That's how you've always been. That's why you were so good at what you did." Her voice softened. "But this isn't a battlefield, Corbin." His jaw clenched. "Feels like one." She exhaled, stepping closer, lowering her voice as if gentleness alone could reach him, could pull him back from wherever he was slipping. "Listen to me. The system is slow, but that doesn't mean it's useless. We're filing a case. I have connections with reporters, activists, watchdogs. This isn't going to just go away. People will hear about what happened. The pressure will build, and they'll have to act." Corbin's gaze didn't waver. "No, they won't." "Yes, they will. It takes time, but it works." "They already closed the internal investigation, Serafina." Her breath hitched, her hands curling into fists. "What?" Corbin's voice was calm, detached, in a way that didn't match the fire in his eyes. "They wrapped it up this morning. No misconduct, no disciplinary action, no charges, justified force." Serafina's entire body tensed, her expression twisting between disbelief and fury. "They." She cut herself off, pacing toward the window, pressing a hand against her forehead, as if physically holding back the words that wanted to escape. "Of course they did. Of course they—" She turned back, her voice sharp. "That doesn't mean we're done. We can appeal. We can take this higher. We can—" "No, Serafina." His voice was steady, final. She shook her head. "No, you don't get to say that. Not after what they did. Not after what they took from you. This isn't over." Corbin leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his fingers lacing together, his gaze never leaving hers. "They took everything from me in a matter of seconds. But you're telling me to wait, to hope that the same system that let them walk free will suddenly find an accountability it's never had before? You're telling me that if I sit still, if I trust the process, maybe in 6 months or a year, there might be a hearing, a slap on the wrist, a forced resignation maybe. But Serafina, you and I both know exactly how this plays out." Her throat bobbed, her breath unsteady. "We have to at least try." "I did try," he said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. "I tried the moment they put me in cuffs. I tried when I told them I lived here. I tried when I showed them my ID. I tried when I stood still, when I spoke politely, when I didn't resist, when I begged them to see me as human. I tried, Serafina." His voice faltered just slightly. "And Kaiser still died, and I still went to jail." Serafina clenched her jaw, her eyes shining with something between frustration and sorrow. Corbin leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I'm done trying." She stepped forward, lowering herself into the chair across from him, searching his face. "What are you saying?" Corbin tilted his head slightly, as if contemplating the weight of the words before speaking them aloud. "I think you already know." Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Corbin, I'm not asking you to be okay with it," he cut in, his voice still impossibly calm, too steady for what he was about to say. "I'm just telling you where I stand, and where this is going." Serafina's breath trembled, her eyes searching his face for something, doubt, hesitation, a sign that there was still a path she could lead him down, still a way to turn him from whatever was unfolding in his mind. But she saw nothing, just resolve, cold, unshakable, unwavering. She swallowed hard, her voice quiet, brittle. "If you do this, there's no coming back." Corbin held her gaze. "I don't want to come back." A silence stretched between them, thick with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Serafina exhaled, slow and measured, before standing, smoothing out her jacket with steady hands. "I'll call you tomorrow." Corbin nodded. She hesitated for just a second longer, her fingers twitching slightly at her sides, as if she wanted to reach out, wanted to grab him, shake him, pull him back to the brother she knew before all of this. But instead, she turned and walked out. The door. Corbin waited until the sound of her car engine faded into the distance before he rose from his seat, moving toward the counter. His hands hovered over Kaiser's leash. His fingers brushed over the worn leather, tracing the familiar feel of it, the weight of memory embedded in every inch. Then, slowly, deliberately, he picked it up and coiled it tightly in his palm. Not as a leash, not as something that would ever be used again for what it was meant for, but as a reminder, a promise. A war was coming, and Corbin was ready. The bar was nestled at the city's edge, far from the well-lit streets where Vance's uniform still commanded a certain weight. Here, nobody cared that he was a cop. Here, he could be exactly the kind of man he had always been. Reckless, arrogant, unafraid. Corbin had been watching him for days, learning the rhythm of his vices. The way he drifted to the same stool at the bar like clockwork. The way he leaned in too close to women who weren't his wife. The way he tossed back whiskey, as, if it were water, drowning himself in the filth of his own existence. He had no idea he was being hunted. Corbin sat in a corner of the bar, hood low, his drink untouched, as he watched Vance stumble his way through another night of indulgence. The man was predictable, and predictability was a weakness. He had parked in the same alley behind the bar, the one with no security cameras, no streetlights, the perfect place for a man to disappear for a few minutes without anyone noticing. Corbin was going to make sure Vance disappeared just long enough for his world to start crumbling. Vance laughed loudly, a crude, obnoxious sound, slapping the back of the bartender like they were old friends. He swayed slightly, his balance compromised from the 5 drinks he had already downed, his words slurred but confident, like a man who believed nothing bad could ever happen to him. Corbin exhaled slowly, finishing his drink in one smooth sip before rising to his feet. He let Vance move first, let him feel the false sense of security that came from being in familiar territory. Vance didn't even glance around as he stumbled toward the back exit, muttering something under his breath as he pushed through the door, stepping into the dark alley beyond. The moment the door swung shut behind him, the game began. Corbin followed, silent as a shadow, his breath steady, his pulse slow, his muscles coiled with the kind of patience only men like him knew how to wield. Vance had no idea he wasn't alone. The cop fumbled with his keys, cursing as they slipped from his fingers, clattering against the pavement. He grunted, leaning forward to retrieve them. Corbin struck. A hard, precise kick to the ribs sent Vance crashing to the ground, his head bouncing against the pavement with a sickening crack. The man let out a sharp gasp, hands scrambling against the concrete, his confusion instant and absolute. "What the—" Corbin didn't let him finish. A steel-toed boot slammed into his stomach, knocking the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping. Like a fish on dry land, there was no hesitation, no wasted motion, no mercy. Corbin grabbed Vance by the collar, dragging him up just to slam him back down, the back of his skull bouncing off the asphalt again, dazing him, leaving him too disoriented to fight back. Vance groaned, his body limp, his fingers clawing at Corbin's arms, desperate, weak. "Who—" Corbin grabbed a fistful of his hair and yanked his head back, bringing his mouth close to the man's ear, his voice a whisper, low and deadly. "You don't get to know who I am," he murmured. "Not yet." Vance shuddered. Corbin released him, letting him drop hard against the pavement. He stood over him, watching as the man tried to move, tried to make sense of what was happening, tried to pull himself together. It was useless. Corbin crouched down, tilting his head slightly, his voice still eerily calm. "You like to play judge, jury, and executioner, don't you?" he mused. "It's easy when you've got a badge, isn't it? Easy when you've got a system that protects you, when no one ever fights back." Vance sucked in a sharp, trembling breath, his hands curling into fists. You're dead, you hear me?" His voice wavered, shaking beneath the bravado. "You don't—" The next punch was swift, calculated, sending blood splattering across the pavement. "That was for all my black brothers and sisters you've harassed and beat," he said. Vance choked, spitting red onto the ground, his body curling inward. Corbin let the silence stretch, let the pain settle in deep before speaking again, his voice softer this time, but no less terrifying. "This is the last time you ever walk away from something like this," he said. "Because after tonight, I'm going to take everything from you. Your job, your reputation, your family, your safety, and when there's nothing left, you'll wake up every day knowing that somewhere out there, I'm watching you." Vance let out a choked, ragged breath. Corbin leaned in. This is just the beginning. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. Vance remained on the ground, bleeding, shaking, his heart pounding with a terror he had never felt before. For the first time in his life, he was the one being hunted. Vance lay on the ground, his body aching in ways he had never experienced before. Pain was something he had always inflicted, never something he had to endure. But now the pavement beneath him felt like quicksand. Every attempt to move sent sharp reminders of the blows he had taken. His ribs screamed with each shallow breath. His face was slick with his own blood, and his head throbbed so violently he thought he might pass out. His fingers trembled as he pressed his palms against the pavement, trying to push himself up. His vision swam, streetlights blurring into hazy orange halos, his heartbeat pounding in his ears, drowning out the distant sounds of traffic from the main road. The alley was empty, silent. Whoever had done this to him was gone, and yet Vance felt no relief. The man's words echoed in his skull, low and measured, cutting deeper than any of the blows he had landed. "This is the last time you ever walk away from something like this. Because after tonight, I'm going to take everything from you." A slow, unsteady breath rasped through Vance's throat, his stomach twisting in a way that had nothing to do with his injuries. There had been something unnatural about the way the man spoke, so certain, so absolute, like he wasn't just making threats, but promising inevitabilities. And the worst part? Vance believed him. With a grunt, he forced himself upright, his legs shaking beneath his weight, his back pressed against the brick wall for support. His fingers fumbled against his pocket for his phone. The screen was cracked, smeared with blood, but it still worked. He dialed. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Jesus, Vance, it's 1 a.m, Shaw's voice grumbled, thick with exhaustion. What the hell do you— I need backup, Vance rasped, cutting him off, his breath uneven now. There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. Where are you? Back alley behind O'Malley's, Vance muttered, reaching up to wipe the blood from his brow. Some son of a— jumped me. Didn't see his face. He hesitated, the words getting caught in his throat. He had never hesitated before. He what? Shaw's voice was sharper now, more alert. Vance swallowed, licking his cracked lips. He knew me, Shaw. He knew my name. He knew everything. Another pause, longer this time. Everything he said. Vance exhaled, squeezing his eyes shut for a moment before opening them again. He said he's going to ruin me, that he's going to take everything from me. Shaw scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease beneath the dismissal. Probably some drunk idiot trying to talk big. You're still standing, aren't you? Vance forced a bitter laugh, but it felt hollow. You don't get it. This guy wasn't some thug looking for a fight. This was different. Shaw groaned, the sound of rustling sheets and movement coming through the phone. All right, sit tight. I'll be there in 10. The call ended. Vance leaned, his head back against the wall, staring up at the dark sky above him, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just pain. It was fear. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. Shaw arrived exactly when he said he would, pulling into the alley with his unmarked car, headlights washing over Vance's battered form. He stepped out, dressed in casual clothes, his badge hanging from his belt, his gun at his hip. The hell happened to you? Shaw muttered, taking in the sight of him. Vance groaned, pushing himself off the wall. You think I did this to myself? Shaw gave him a once-over before glancing around the alley, scanning the shadows. You said you didn't see his face? No, Vance muttered, flexing his fingers, wincing at the soreness. He came out of nowhere, moved fast, knew exactly where to hit, military fast. Shaw frowned. So what? Some pissed-off veteran with a grudge? Vance exhaled sharply. I don't know, but he wasn't just some random guy looking to start trouble. He knew me. He knew about us. He knew what we've done. Shaw's expression darkened, his jaw tight. Then we find him. Vance let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, and how do you plan on doing that? We don't even have a description. Shaw stepped closer, his voice low. Someone comes after us, we shut it down. That's how this works. Whoever this guy is, he made a mistake. He left you alive. That means he left an opening. Vance was silent for a moment, then nodded, forcing himself to straighten. Yeah, you're right. Shaw glanced at his phone. I'll make some calls, see if we can find anything. Vance nodded again, but his mind was still trapped in the alley, still replaying every word his attacker had spoken. This is just the beginning? Shaw clapped him on the shoulder, but Vance barely felt it. Somewhere out there, the man who had done this to him was watching, waiting, planning, and Vance knew with a certainty that sent ice through his veins that he had already lost control. Corbin had expected them to retaliate, but what interested him was how they would respond. He had anticipated panic, the erratic desperation of men who believed themselves untouchable, only to realize that something unseen, something stronger, had set its sights on them. They had spent years preying on the weak, operating under the illusion that their authority was absolute, that their uniforms shielded them from consequences. Now, stripped of their security, forced to reckon with the reality that they were being hunted, they had no idea where to begin. So they did what men like them always did. They found someone else to blame. Corbin sat in his car across the street, engine off, his seat reclined just enough to avoid drawing attention. His camera lens was trained on Vance and Shaw as they moved with the kind of aggression that only came from fear. They weren't handling this the way an officer would handle an investigation. No interviews, no proper protocol, no reports being filed. This was retaliation. Vance was still limping slightly, a bruise creeping from beneath his collar, his face stiff with pain. But it wasn't just the beating that had broken him. It was the unknown. He had been attacked in a way he had never experienced before, helpless, powerless, eaten in the shadows without ever seeing the man who had done it, and that had shaken him deeper than any bruise ever could. They had stopped outside a rundown boxing gym, the kind that never advertised, the kind built for fighters who didn't just train for sport, but for survival. It wasn't surprising. Vance and Shaw had a long history of targeting strong, outspoken black men in their precinct, men they viewed as a challenge, men who never bowed their heads. Corbin's eyes flicked toward the entrance of the gym as the door swung open, revealing a familiar face, Marcus Stone. Tall, built like a linebacker, his presence commanded attention without effort. He was a well-known figure in the community, a former amateur fighter turned youth mentor, one of the few men who had always stood up against exactly the kind of officers Vance and Shaw were. Corbin remembered reading about the time Stone had filed excessive force complaints against them 2 years ago after a violent, baseless arrest. The charges had been buried beneath red tape, dismissed as resisting arrest. But Corbin had seen the photos, the bruises on Stone's ribs, the split in his eyebrow, the raw abrasions on his wrists from the cuffs that had been tightened just a little too much. And now Vance and Shaw were back, staring him down like they were searching for something, their eyes sharp, expectant. Corbin lifted his camera, zooming in. The conversation was tense from the start. Vance stood too close, his arms crossed, his chin tilted upward in the kind of posture that dared a man to retaliate. Shaw kept shifting his weight, glancing at the street like he expected someone to be watching. Stone wasn't intimidated. He never had been. He leaned against the door, frame of the gym, wiping sweat from his brow, his expression unimpressed, as Vance spoke. Corbin couldn't hear them, but he didn't need to. The body language told him everything. Vance was demanding something, his gestures sharp, impatient. Stone shook his head, then smirked, saying something that made Shaw step forward, teeth bared, in frustration. Stone pushed off the doorframe, standing taller, making it clear that he wasn't backing down. Corbin adjusted the lens, capturing every second. Shaw took another step, but Vance put a hand on his chest, stopping him. He turned back to Stone, his expression darkening, a warning. Stone didn't flinch. He just laughed. Vance's hands clenched, at his sides, but he said nothing else. He turned on his heel, motioning for Shaw to follow. They left without another word, their shoulders stiff, their pace tight. Corbin exhaled, lowering the camera just slightly. So that was their plan. They had no leads, no idea who was responsible, so they were going to find the strongest black men in the community and shake them down, waiting to see who flinched. Cowards. Corbin watched as Stone muttered something under his breath, shaking his head before heading back inside the gym. Vance and Shaw, however, weren't finished. They got into their car and Corbin tailed them, keeping 3 cars behind, always in their blind spots. They weren't looking for him. They weren't careful. The next stop was the apartment complex where Julian Croft lived. Corbin knew that name. Croft had been another victim of Vance and Shaw's abuse, pulled over on a bogus traffic stop 6 months ago, dragged out of his car, accused of having a weapon that had never existed. He had been arrested, beaten in the holding cell, and charged with assaulting an officer, even though the only injuries that night had been his. Corbin sat in silence, watching as Vance and Shaw approached the front door, knocking hard enough to rattle the frame. The door opened after a few seconds, and Croft appeared, rubbing his eyes, clearly just waking up. They didn't waste time. Vance shoved the door open wider, stepping inside, uninvited. Croft tensed, confusion morphing into irritation, but he didn't fight back. He knew better. Shaw entered behind him, blocking the exit, forcing Croft back toward his own kitchen. Corbin adjusted his camera, zooming in through the window. Their expressions were sharp, accusing. Croft was defensive, hands raised slightly in that universal sign of compliance. They were interrogating him. Corbin's fingers tightened around the camera. Vance said something, then pointed at Croft's arms, his physique, his posture. They were profiling him in real time, looking at his build, his strength, already deciding that it made him guilty of something. Croft's jaw clenched, and then he did something unexpected. He laughed. Vance's face darkened instantly. Shaw took a step forward, invading Croft's space. Corbin took a deep breath, steadying his hands. He didn't need to intervene, not yet. This wasn't about stopping them in the moment. This was about documenting everything. He had everything he needed. They were digging their own graves, and Corbin was going to bury them. Corbin had followed them long enough to know their methods. Their fear had turned to desperation, and desperation made them reckless. They had no suspects, no direction, no tangible way to fight back against an enemy they couldn't see. So instead, they did what cowards did best. They attacked blindly, hoping to hit something. He watched from 3 cars behind as Vance and Shaw drove in tight circles through the city, stopping only to intimidate men they had once arrested, men they assumed might be capable of the kind of calculated brutality that had left Vance broken and afraid. But fear had made them impatient, and impatience had made them sloppy. Corbin knew what was coming before they did. They had been targeting men like Stone and Croft because they had power, physical strength, the ability to fight back. But when that didn't get them any answers, they would switch tactics. They would look for someone else, someone like him. He saw it in the way Shaw hesitated before turning onto a familiar street, in the way Vance leaned forward, eyes narrowed, as the house came into view. They thought they were being subtle, but Corbin had been waiting for this moment. He had been preparing. They were coming for him, and they had no idea that he wanted them to. Corbin had spent 2 nights preparing the house, not the obvious security measures. No, that would make them suspicious. Instead, he had staged it in a way that made him look vulnerable. A half-full whiskey bottle left visible on the coffee table, unopened mail stacked haphazardly on the kitchen counter, a gun safe carefully left slightly ajar, just enough to suggest negligence. The cameras had been positioned perfectly, hidden in plain sight, in places no cop would ever think to check, because they never thought they needed to. The front porch light was left on, the side gate unlocked. An invitation. Corbin sat in his living room, his phone resting on his knee, his breathing steady as the knock came, sharp and demanding. He rose slowly, keeping his movements relaxed, keeping the illusion intact. The cameras were already recording. Another knock, this time harder. Corbin unlocked the door, swinging it open to reveal Vance and Shaw standing on his porch. "Corbin," he said, keeping his voice even, "something I can help you with?" Vance smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was no friendliness in it, just the thinly veiled pleasure of a man who thought he was back in control. "Mind if we come in?" Vance asked. Corbin leaned against the door frame. "That depends. You got a warrant? You going to shoot me this time instead?" Shaw chuckled. "You got something to hide?" Corbin tilted his head, letting just enough amusement slip into his expression to keep them off guard. "Not at all, but I like to keep things legal, you understand?" Vance's smirk widened. "Yeah, legal. Funny thing about that, isn't it?" Corbin said nothing, just waited, and Vance took the bait. Before Corbin could react, not that he tried to, Vance's hand was on his chest, shoving him back into the house. Corbin staggered, knocking into the side table, the whiskey bottle clattering to the floor. He heard the door click shut behind them. Shaw exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You know what's funny, Corbin? We've been looking into something, real interesting stuff." Corbin stayed where he was, keeping his body language relaxed, keeping his expression blank. "That so?" Vance circled him, like a predator that thought its prey was already beaten. "Yeah, see, we've been thinking. The guy who did this to me, he wasn't some street thug. He was trained. The way he moved, the way he hit. Real professional stuff." Corbin didn't react. "But here's the thing," Vance continued, taking another slow step forward. "Not a lot of people are trained like that, unless, of course, they had the right kind of background." Shaw leaned in. "Like Delta Force." Corbin let the silence stretch, just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then he did exactly what he had planned. He laughed. It wasn't forced. It wasn't nervous. It was a slow, deep chuckle, one that made Vance's expression flicker just slightly, the smallest crack in his confidence. "You think I beat your ass?" Corbin asked, shaking his head, his amusement genuine. "Vance, if I had, you wouldn't have." "Walked away from it?" Shaw's jaw tightened, but Vance recovered, tilting his head. "That's a real interesting response, Corbin." Corbin exhaled, rubbing his jaw like he was just another tired man trying to get through a conversation he wasn't interested in. "Look, I don't know what's going on with you two, but I had nothing to do with whatever happened to you." Vance's smirk returned. "Yeah, well, see, we don't really believe you." Corbin saw it before it happened, the shift in weight, the slight tensing of Vance's shoulder, the way Shaw's fingers curled into fists, and he didn't fight it. The first punch landed hard against his ribs, the impact sharp and brutal. Corbin grunted, stumbling backward, but he didn't resist, didn't defend himself. He let it happen. Another punch, this time to his jaw. His head snapped to the side, pain radiating through his skull. His body wanted to react, to counter, to break them, but he kept his hands loose, his stance slack. Vance grabbed the collar of his shirt, yanking him upright. "Not so tough now, are you?" Corbin let his body sag just slightly, breathing heavy, playing the part perfectly. "You done?" he rasped. Shaw sneered. "For now." Vance shoved him hard against the wall, stepping back with a satisfied smirk. "Stay out of our way, Corbin, because if we find out you had anything to do with this, you're not going to like how it ends." And just like that, they were gone. Corbin stayed on the floor for a few seconds, his ribs throbbing, his lips split, his entire body screaming at him for letting them do it. Then, slowly, he got up. He walked to his laptop, pulled up the camera feeds, and there it was. Everything he needed. The moment Vance and Shaw had sealed their own fate. Corbin sat in front of his laptop, the dim glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes as he replayed the footage. The bruises on his face had already started to fade, but the ache in his ribs still lingered, a dull, constant reminder of what he had endured to set this up. Every punch, every shove, every smug insult from Vance and Shaw had been necessary. Now he was about to make sure it all paid off. He watched as the video played out again. The clarity was perfect. The camera placement had been meticulous, ensuring that there was no ambiguity. The moment Vance pushed his way inside, the moment Shaw closed the door behind him, the moment their arrogance, their unchecked power, was laid bare. Corbin exhaled slowly. The first step had been getting them to act on instinct. The second was making sure their instincts got them killed. He opened a secured folder on his computer, scanning the collection of files, images, and reports he had compiled over the last few weeks. Every unjustified arrest, every excessive force complaint, every time a victim had been silenced. Vance and Shaw weren't just corrupt officers. They were the rot inside the department, the kind of men who thought power was their birthright. And now he was going to take it away from them. He drafted the first email, attaching a carefully edited version of the footage. Not everything, not yet, just enough to stir the pot. The footage would circulate. It would spread to the right eyes, the ones inside the department who had been waiting for an excuse to purge their ranks but had never had enough evidence. Corbin wasn't giving them evidence. He was giving them a weapon. He leaned back, cracking his knuckles, exhaling slowly. The emails were sent. The storm was coming. But first, Shaw still needed a beating. Corbin had spent days studying Shaw's schedule, tracking him the same way he had Vance. But unlike Vance, Shaw wasn't reckless. He was angry, twitchy, looking over his shoulder, gripping his gun a little tighter than before. Vance had taken the first blow, and Shaw knew he was next, but that wouldn't save him. Corbin watched from the driver's seat of his car, parked a safe distance away, from a bar Shaw had been frequenting for the last few nights. Not a place cops usually drank. This was a dive, a hole in the wall where no one asked questions. Shaw, had been there for 3 hours. Corbin knew why. The man was unraveling. The department had been whispering. There were rumors that internal affairs had been asking about Vance, about past arrests, about misconduct complaints. Shaw wasn't stupid. He knew if Vance went down, he was going with him. Corbin had made sure of that. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, his mind already working through the next steps. He didn't need to trick Shaw into a fight the way he had with Vance. He just needed to wait until the bastard was drunk enough to make a mistake. And Shaw was getting there. The door to the bar swung open, and Shaw stumbled out, shoulders hunched. Tension etched into every line of his body. He looked like a man walking toward a noose. Corbin exhaled slowly, rolling his neck. It was time. He exited the car, keeping his steps measured, silent. He let Shaw move first, waiting, watching, following. The drunk cop wasn't heading home. He was too restless, too pissed off. Instead, he was walking through the alley behind the bar, a shortcut, to the parking lot where his car was waiting. Corbin followed him into the dark. He had chosen the location. Now he was choosing the moment. He let Shaw take a few more steps before finally speaking. "Long night?" Shaw froze. Corbin saw the way the man's shoulders tensed, his body going stiff, his instincts screaming at him that something was wrong. Slowly Shaw turned, his eyes narrowing in confusion, before flickering with recognition. "You," he muttered. Corbin didn't move. "You look tired, Shaw." Shaw's fingers twitched near his waistband, near the gun he had no doubt been keeping close since Vance's attack. "What the hell do you want?" Corbin tilted his head slightly, keeping his voice calm. "I want you to understand something," Shaw sneered. "Yeah? And what's that?" Corbin took a slow step forward. "You're done." Shaw stiffened. The silence between them stretched, thick, electric. Then Shaw scoffed, shaking his head, forcing out a laugh. "You're real confident for a guy who let us use him as a punching bag." Corbin exhaled slowly. "Yeah, funny thing about that." Shaw's smirk faltered just slightly. Corbin took another step forward. "Vance was just the beginning," he said, his voice softer now, almost casual. "But I'm going to take my time. With you." Shaw's nostrils flared, his hand jerking toward his gun. He never got the chance to pull it. Corbin struck first, fast, precise, and then Shaw was falling. The last thing he saw was Corbin standing over him, waiting for him to get up so they could really get started. Shaw hit the pavement hard, the impact rattling through his bones, his lungs gasping for air that refused to come. The moment his body crumpled, he knew this wasn't like Vance's beating. This wasn't a message. This was personal. He tried to push himself up, but before he could move, a boot slammed down on his wrist, grinding his hand into the rough asphalt. Pain flared white-hot up his arm, and he let out a strangled grunt. "Stay down," Corbin said. Shaw recognized the voice, even through the haze of adrenaline and the ringing in his ears. He knew exactly who it was, and for the first time in his miserable, pathetic life, he felt real fear. He struggled anyway, his instincts kicking in, years of unchecked aggression telling him to fight, to take control, to dominate. But he was too slow, too drunk, too reliant on a badge that wasn't here to save him. Corbin moved first, his fist driving into Shaw's ribs. Hard, a perfect, precise strike between bone and muscle, designed to hurt, designed to linger. Shaw choked on the breath that had been ripped from him, wheezing as his body seized from the impact. "You remember me now, don't you?" Corbin murmured, his voice impossibly calm, measured. Shaw coughed, trying to twist free, but Corbin grabbed him by the collar, yanking him upright just enough so they were face to face. "Look at me," Corbin ordered. Shaw's swollen eyes blinked up at him, his breath ragged, his lips cracked with blood. Recognition flickered, followed by horror. "You," Shaw rasped. Corbin's grip tightened. "Say my name." Shaw swallowed, his throat clicking in the silence. "You don't want to, do you?" Corbin continued. "Because if you say my name, it means you know exactly why this is happening. It means you remember what you did." Shaw's jaw clenched, defiant even as his body betrayed him, shaking beneath Corbin's grip. Corbin exhaled sharply, then leaned in, his voice low, deadly. "You shot my dog." Shaw flinched. "You remember now, don't you?" Corbin continued, his voice softer now, almost like he was speaking to a child. "I bet it felt real good at the time, didn't it? Real easy. Just another kill, another thing you could do because no one was going to stop you." Shaw coughed, his body shaking harder now. Whether from pain or terror, Corbin didn't care. "But I'm not like the people you target, Shaw. You should have known that." Corbin's grip tightened on his shirt, his voice turning to ice. "I don't forget. I don't forgive. And I don't let things go." Shaw tried to speak, tried to form words, but Corbin didn't give him the chance. The next punch shattered his nose. Shaw let out a garbled yell, blood gushing down his face, his body spasming from the sheer force of the impact. His head lolled back against the pavement, a wet, gurgling sound escaping his lips. Corbin didn't stop. He made sure Shaw felt every bit of what Kaiser had felt, every kick, every punch, every ounce of suffering Shaw had inflicted on others was repaid tenfold. By the time Corbin finally let him go, Shaw was a heap of broken flesh and shattered arrogance. But Corbin wasn't finished. He crouched down beside him, his breath steady, his voice quiet. "This is just the beginning." Shaw let out a low, trembling whimper. Corbin's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smirk. "Remember how I said I don't forget?" Shaw didn't answer. He was barely conscious. Corbin stood, stepping back, leaving Shaw sprawled in the filth of his own blood and failure. Good. And then just like that, he was gone. By the time Shaw clawed his way back to his car, Corbin was exactly where he needed to be, inside a fully booked casino, the Onyx Spire. It had been part of the plan all along. Corbin walked through the lobby, passing security, letting the cameras catch every step, every angle, every detail of his face. He made small talk with the pit bosses, played a few hands of blackjack, even let himself lose a couple of rounds, just to make sure he was memorable. Then, for the final touch, he walked right up to the bar, tapped his knuckles against the counter, and ordered the strongest drink they had. "Rough night?" the bartender asked. Corbin let out a short, easy chuckle. "Something like that." He lifted the glass in a small toast, took a long sip, and smiled. Let the whole damn casino see him. Let every camera record him. Let Shaw crawl his way back to the precinct and scream his name into the void. Because it wouldn't matter. By the time the cops pulled the security footage, by the time they went looking for proof, all they'd find was Corbin Thorne sitting at a bar, sipping whiskey, surrounded by 100 people who could swear he hadn't left their sight all night. Shaw knew the truth. Vance would know too. But they couldn't prove a damn thing. That was the beauty of it. Corbin drove home with the calm precision of a man who already knew what was waiting for him. He had played his part, set every piece exactly where it needed to be. The next move wasn't his, it was theirs. The flashing red and blue lights were visible before he even turned onto his street. 2 patrol cars parked at the curb, 4 officers standing near his driveway. One of them was already looking toward his approaching vehicle. Corbin exhaled slowly, not in surprise, not in fear, but in quiet satisfaction. They had taken the bait. He pulled into his driveway and shut off the engine. His movements were controlled, deliberate, designed to show no resistance. The officers were already moving before he had even stepped out of the car. "Corbin Thorne," one of them said, his voice sharp, authoritative, rehearsed. Corbin gave them an easy nod. "That's me. Step out of the vehicle." Corbin didn't argue, didn't hesitate. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped onto the pavement, his expression unreadable. One of the cops, a stocky officer with a tight jaw and an even tighter grip on his belt, stepped forward. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Corbin's lips curled slightly. "You sure you want to do this?" The officer's face twitched, a flicker of uncertainty flashing in his eyes. but it was gone just as fast. "Do it, now." Corbin shrugged, then turned, letting them cuff him without so much as a word of protest. The cold steel bit into his wrists, but Corbin barely felt it. Everything was happening exactly as it needed to. They guided him toward the patrol car, one of them reciting his rights. But Corbin wasn't listening. His focus was on the house across the street, the one where an older woman, his longtime neighbor, stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She had seen him come home. She had seen the cops waiting for him, and when the time came, she would tell them exactly that. It was all part of the plan. The drive to the station was uneventful. The officers spoke, but Corbin didn't respond. He just sat in silence, his expression calm, his posture relaxed. By the time they pulled into the station's back lot, the shift in atmosphere was palpable. The department was tense, restless. Something was coming, and they all knew it. They led him inside, past rows of desks where officers glanced up from paperwork, their gazes flickering between Corbin and the ones escorting him, some confused, some expectant. He was taken to a small, windowless room, the kind that had seen countless interrogations before him. The walls were bare, the table scratched from years of use. A single overhead light flickered slightly, casting sharp shadows. They left him there. Corbin waited. 15 minutes passed before the door opened again. Captain Sterling stepped inside, his presence alone enough to change the air in the room. He was a man who carried authority like a weapon, who never spoke without knowing his words carried weight. He dropped a file onto the table and took a seat across from Corbin, his fingers tapping once against the surface. "You know why you're here?" Sterling asked. Corbin leaned back slightly, tilting his head. "Not a clue." Sterling exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. He opened the file, flipping through the first few pages before sliding it toward Corbin. Inside were pictures, images of Shaw and Vance, beaten, bruised, humiliated. One of Shaw lying in his own blood, another of Vance staggering into the precinct, barely able to stand. Corbin didn't blink. Sterling watched him carefully. "2 of my officers were attacked in the past week, both of them beaten within an inch of their lives. Both of them are convinced they know exactly who did it." Corbin raised a brow. "That so?" Sterling leaned forward slightly. "You want to tell me where you were last night?" Corbin smiled. There it was, the question he had been waiting for. He let the silence stretch before answering. "Sure, I was at the Onyx Spire casino floor, main bar. You'll find the security footage. Matches up exactly with the time Shaw was getting his ass handed to him. Funny how that works, huh?" Sterling's expression didn't change, but Corbin caught the slight flicker in his eyes. "You think this is a game?" Sterling asked. Corbin shrugged. "No, but I think you're wasting my time." Sterling didn't respond. Instead, he reached into the file again, pulling out another document. This one, a printed email. Corbin already knew what it was. The leak had begun. Sterling's jaw tightened as he placed the paper in front of Corbin. The first batch of footage, Vance and Shaw breaking into Corbin's home, the body cam failures, the violent arrests, the buried reports, had already started making its way through the right channels. By now, journalists would have it. Whistleblower groups, the public defenders who had been fighting against the corruption in the department for years, but had never had solid proof. Now, they did. And it was all coming out while Corbin sat here, cuffed to a chair, looking completely and utterly untouchable. Sterling stared at him, his fingers pressed together. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're making a mistake." Corbin met his gaze without hesitation. "No, you made the mistake." Sterling's fingers twitched, but he kept his voice even. "You think this ends with them? You think this doesn't go higher?" Corbin smirked. "Oh, I'm counting on it." A knock on the door interrupted them. A younger officer peeked inside, looking hesitant. Captain? You need to see this." Sterling turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Not now." "Sir, it's about—" The officer hesitated, then lowered his voice. "It's everywhere. The footage, The emails, the IA reports, it's already on the news. For the first time, Corbin saw it. The moment Sterling realized he had lost, the captain's jaw clenched. He turned back to Corbin, but there was nothing left to say. The door opened fully, and a second officer stepped in. "Sir, we need to release him." Sterling didn't move. Corbin leaned forward slightly. "You should uncuff me now." Sterling's fists clenched at his sides, but he knew the damage was already done. A few moments later, the cuffs clicked open. Corbin stood, rubbing his wrists, then straightened his shirt. He gave Sterling one last look. "Next time," Corbin said, his voice low, almost amused, "pick better men." Then he walked out. And outside the station, the world was already burning. Corbin stepped out of the precinct into a world that had already turned against the men who once ruled it. It had only taken hours, but the shift was absolute. The moment the footage had gone live, the break-in, the assault, the history of corruption, the proof of cover-ups, there was no stopping the storm. It spread faster than the department could contain, igniting social media, flooding news stations, pulling reporters to the front doors of precincts, demanding statements that no one inside was prepared to give. And at the center of it all, the name on every headline, Corbin Thorne, not as a suspect, not as a criminal, but as the man who had exposed the rot. Now, as he stood on the precinct steps, he wasn't the one being hunted. The real criminals were. A swarm of journalists pushed forward the moment he appeared, cameras flashing, microphones stretching toward him, the air electric, the shouts blending into an incoherent roar of questions. "Mr. Thorne, do you have anything to say about the footage of the officers attacking you in your own home? Do you feel vindicated now that the truth is out?" Corbin ignored them. Instead, his gaze locked onto the two men standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by reporters caught in the chaos of their own downfall. Vance, Shaw. The former stood rigid, his usual arrogance replaced with thinly veiled panic. Shaw, on the other hand, was barely holding himself together, his face still marked from the beating, his swollen lip pressed into a tight line. They looked at Corbin, and Corbin looked right back. It was the first time they had been forced to face him without power, without their badges acting as shields, without the certainty that they were untouchable. And they knew it. Corbin stepped forward, moving through the crowd as the reporters realized what was happening. Their cameras now, trained on the moment, the confrontation everyone had been waiting for. For once, Vance had no words. Corbin stopped just feet away from them, his expression unreadable, his silence louder than anything he could have said. Shaw was the first to crack. "You set us up," he spat, his voice hoarse, wild, "this whole damn thing." Corbin smiled, slow, deliberate. "You did this to yourself." Shaw flinched at the words, rage flashing across his face. He stepped forward, a reflex, a remnant of the old days, back when intimidation had weight. But the moment he moved, the reporters surged in closer, the world, watching, waiting, and he realized too late that there was nothing left to intimidate Corbin with. Not anymore. Vance let out a bitter breath, his shoulders tight. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Corbin tilted his head slightly. "Enjoy what?" Vance's jaw clenched. "Your little moment. This won't last forever." Corbin chuckled, and it was the sound of a man who had already won because he had. "This isn't a moment," he said softly. Vance's nostrils flared. "This is the rest of your life," Corbin continued, his voice steady, certain. "You don't come back from this. Neither of you. There's no promotion waiting for you, no cushy retirement, no friends in high places who are going to sweep this under the rug. You're done." Shaw exhaled sharply through his nose, his whole body screaming with the need to lash out, to push, to fight. But there was no one left to fight for him, no one left to cover for him, no one left to protect him. Corbin turned slightly, glancing toward the cameras, making sure the world could see them. Then he leaned in just enough for only the two of them to hear. "You two always thought you were the strongest ones in the room." His voice was soft, calm, mocking. "Turns out you were the weakest. Vance exhaled slowly, his gaze flickering toward the reporters, toward the police station behind them, toward the walls closing in from all sides. He said nothing because there was nothing left to say. Corbin stepped back. "See you around, boys." Then without another glance he turned and walked away, leaving them to drown in the ruin they had built with their own hands. Later that evening, Corbin sat in his living room, the remote in his hand, flipping through the channels. Every station had the same story. Vance and Shaw officially terminated from the force. No pension, no severance, no quiet exits. The department had rushed to distance itself, throwing them under the bus with record-breaking speed. The police chief had given a cold, scripted press conference, condemning their actions, swearing change. It was pathetic. It was perfect. Corbin sipped his drink as the screen cut to a live shot of Vance pushing through a mob of journalists outside. His home, his face tight with barely contained rage. "What do you have to say about the accusations against you?" one reporter asked. Vance didn't answer. "How do you respond to the leaked evidence of your misconduct?" another pressed. Still nothing. The camera angle shifted slightly, and Corbin caught a glimpse of Shaw standing beside him, his expression a mask of barely restrained fury. Good. Let them feel it. The way he had felt it. The way every victim before him had felt it. The camera cut again, this time to a news anchor, her expression polished, professional. Corbin Thorne, the man at the center of this case, was briefly taken into custody before. Being released without charges, Corbin's lips twitched slightly. Though many have speculated about his possible involvement in the officers' recent attacks, an airtight alibi and multiple witnesses have cleared him of any suspicion. However, when asked for comment, the screen shifted to footage from earlier. That day, Corbin standing outside the precinct staring into the cameras. "Do you have any message for the officers who were fired?" He had only said one thing. They got what they deserved. Corbin clicked the TV off. The city was still buzzing. People were still talking, still demanding more, still waiting for some next steps. The world had turned against them, but Corbin knew it wasn't over yet. Vance and Shaw had lost their power. They had been humiliated, disgraced, and thrown out of the force. But Corbin hadn't done all of this just to watch them slink away into the shadows, free to live out their lives in quiet exile. They needed to rot in a cell, and to make that happen, he had to keep pushing. He spent the next week ensuring the evidence wouldn't just linger in the court of public opinion, but would be used to destroy Vance and Shaw completely. He filed formal complaints with Internal Affairs, not just about the attacks on him, but about everything, every false arrest, every unjustified beating, every body cam failure, every abuse of power. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about setting a precedent, making sure that when corrupt officers were caught, they weren't just fired, they were convicted. And once Corbin put his name on those complaints, once he went public with his testimony, there was no going back. He was stepping into the courtroom, and Vance and Shaw were going to prison. The department tried to resist it. They tried to distance themselves, tried to make Vance and Shaw seem like isolated bad apples, but the public didn't buy it. Every day, protests formed outside the courthouse. Activists demanded that Vance and Shaw be charged. Social media exploded with comparisons of how quickly the system moved against civilians, but stalled when it came to dirty cops. And then the breaking point. A grand jury was convened. The charges? Conspiracy, misconduct, excessive force, aggravated assault, illegal search and seizure, and the most damning of them all, attempted murder. Because Vance and Shaw hadn't just abused their power, they had beaten a man inside his own home, unprovoked, thinking they would never be held accountable. Now they were. And Corbin was going to stand in court and make sure of it. Corbin had avoided them since the fallout, hadn't needed to see them again, but they came to him. 2 weeks after the grand jury announced, he stepped out of a cafe and found Vance waiting for him. No cameras, no reporters, just them. Corbin sighed, tucking his hands into his pockets. "You sure you want to do this?" Vance's face was hard, his jaw clenched. He looked tired, hollow. "Whatever you think you're doing, it won't stick," Vance muttered. "You don't know how this works." Corbin exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "No, Vance, you don't know how this works," Vance scoffed, but it wasn't real confidence anymore. "You think they're really going to send us to prison? Cops don't do time." Corbin took a step closer, his voice calm, measured. "They will when I testify." Vance's jaw twitched. "You think you're a hero?" Corbin tilted his head slightly. "I think I'm the reason you're standing here scared." The words landed. For the first time in his life, Vance was afraid. Corbin leaned in, lowering his voice. "You know what's funny?" Vance didn't move. "You're not even the worst one?" Vance frowned slightly. Corbin let the word settle, then stepped back, hands still in his pockets. "See you in court." He walked past him without looking back. Vance didn't follow, because he had already lost. The legal battle was set. Vance and Shaw's lawyers tried to fight the charges, tried to spin it as overreach, tried to argue that Corbin had instigated the situation. But the footage spoke for itself. The evidence was overwhelming, and Corbin was the key witness. When the trial date was set, the headlines were brutal. Ex-cops face criminal trial in brutality case. Former officers accused of assaulting man in his own home. New era of accountability? The city had never seen something like this, but they were about to. Corbin adjusted his suit in the mirror, his expression unreadable. The next time he saw Vance and Shaw, it would be in court. And when the judge handed down the sentence, he would be watching. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the gallery, their pens tapping against notepads, their cameras poised for the moments that would shape the headlines for weeks. Activists and community leaders sat in silence, their expressions tense, their presence a testament to how much this case meant beyond just one man. At the front, the prosecution team flipped through files, their confidence steady, their strategy set. And then there was Corbin seated at the witness stand. His posture was upright, controlled, his expression unreadable. He had been in high-pressure situations before, but this was different. This wasn't war. This wasn't an enemy hiding in the shadows. This was justice unfolding in broad daylight. Across the room, Vance and Shaw sat at the defense table, their faces masks of feigned indifference, but Corbin saw the tension in their shoulders, the way Shaw's fingers twitched at nothing, the way Vance exhaled just a little too sharply when the judge entered the room. They were scared, and they should be. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a voice that brokered no nonsense, gave the usual instructions. The charges were read aloud, each count landing heavier than the last. Then the prosecutor stood, adjusting her suit jacket before stepping forward. "Your Honor, the state calls Corbin Thorne to the stand." Corbin stood, stepping forward. He raised his right hand, took the oath, sat back down. And then, for the first time since this all began, he spoke his truth, where it could never be ignored again. The prosecutor approached, her voice clear, steady. "Mr. Thorne, can you state your full name for the record?" "Corbin Thorne." "And your occupation?" "I work in private security, formerly U.S. Army, Delta Force." That got a reaction, a ripple in the gallery, a shift in Vance's expression, a tightening of Shaw's jaw. Corbin didn't look at them. The prosecutor continued. "Mr. Thorne, do you recall the events of the night of March 4th? Corbin's hands rested on the table. In front of him. "I do." "Can you walk us through them?" He exhaled slowly, collecting himself. Then he began. "I was walking my dog. His name was Kaiser. He was a German shepherd, 6 years old, trained, loyal. He was my best friend, my family." The words came easily, too easily, like they had been waiting to be spoken for far too long. I had just gotten back from a long shift. I liked taking him out late. It was quiet, peaceful. We were just passing through the neighborhood when I saw the headlights behind me. A police cruiser slowed down. I didn't think much of it at first until they got out. The prosecutor nodded. Who do you mean by they? Corbin didn't hesitate. Officers Vance and Shaw. For the first time he looked at them. Vance's jaw twitched. Shaw's eyes darted away. The prosecutor stepped closer. What happened next? They told me I didn't belong there. His voice was steady, unwavering. They asked me where I was going, asked me for ID. I stayed calm, told them I lived in the neighborhood, gave them my address. They saw it on my license. They still didn't believe me. He felt the silence in the room shift. They started pushing. Aggressive questions, accusations. Vance kept his hand on his gun the whole time. Corbin exhaled. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resist. But it didn't matter. The prosecutor nodded. Can you describe what happened with Kaiser? Corbin clenched. His jaw. This part hurt the most. He could tell something was wrong. Dogs know. He stepped forward, not aggressively, just protective. I told him to stay back. He listened. His voice tightened just slightly. But Shaw drew his gun anyway. The gallery stilled. I told him there was no threat, that Kaiser wasn't a danger, but Shaw didn't care. He swallowed, staring straight ahead, refusing to blink. He pulled the trigger anyway. A pause, a long, heavy pause. Corbin exhaled sharply. One shot, straight to the chest. Kaiser didn't even make a sound. He just dropped. The tension in the room was a living thing. The prosecutor gave him a moment. Then, softly, what happened after that? Corbin exhaled slowly. I lost control. I screamed. I stepped toward him, toward Kaiser, and that was all the excuse they needed. They tackled me, beat me, tased me. You were arrested? Yeah. Corbin's voice darkened. They didn't charge me, though, because they had nothing. They held me for hours, then let me go. And then, what happened, Mr. Thorne? His gaze sharpened. They came back. More murmurs in the gallery. The prosecutor nodded, stepping closer. Can you clarify what you mean? Corbin's fingers tightened. Days later, they showed up at my house. No warrant, no cause, just two men who didn't like that I had challenged them. His voice was low now, steady, deadly. They forced their way inside. They attacked me in my own home. Do you have evidence of this? Corbin glanced at the screen beside them. It's all on tape. The prosecution team tapped a remote, and the footage played, every second of it. The moment they shoved their way inside, the punches, the threats, the way they thought they were invincible, untouchable. Corbin didn't watch. He had already lived it. He kept his gaze forward, staring into nothing. Vance and Shaw watched, though, and they knew, just like everyone else in this room, that it was over. The footage ended. The prosecutor turned back to him. Do you believe officers Vance and Shaw should be held responsible for their actions? Corbin didn't hesitate. Yes. Why? He finally turned, looking them dead in the eye. Because they are criminals. The words landed like a hammer. Shaw's fingers curled into fists. Vance stared at the table, his face tight. The judge exhaled slowly. I think we've heard enough for today. The bailiff called the court to recess, but Corbin knew this wasn't a break. This was the beginning of the end. The courtroom felt heavier now, weighed down by the gravity of everything that had been laid bare. The world had seen the truth. And now all that remained was the question of whether the system would do what it had always failed to do, deliver justice. Corbin sat at the witness table, his posture straight, his hands resting lightly against the polished wood, as the defense took their turn. Vance and Shaw's attorney was a sharp-dressed man with a voice that carried the kind of forced confidence only a man with a losing case could muster. He moved toward the center of the room, clearing his throat before looking at Corbin with the careful calculation of a man grasping at straws. Mr. Thorne, he began, his tone overly polite, you've been through quite an ordeal, haven't you? Corbin said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than words. The lawyer took that as an invitation to continue. First, you're accused of something you didn't do. Then your dog. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, choosing his words carefully. Was shot. Then you were physically assaulted. It must have been traumatic. Corbin's jaw tightened slightly. It was. The lawyer nodded, as if that was what he wanted to hear. Would you say that trauma has influenced your perspective on these events? Corbin exhaled slowly, recognizing the play. They were going to try to make him seem emotional, unstable, someone seeking revenge rather than justice. He met the lawyer's gaze, his voice steady. My perspective doesn't change the facts. The lawyer smiled thinly, feigning patience. Of course, but trauma can shape how we interpret events, don't you think? Corbin tilted his head slightly. You don't need my interpretation. You have the footage. The words landed like a slap, and the lawyer's expression flickered with frustration. That footage does not show the full context. Corbin raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting there's a context where two officers forcing their way into my home and beating me is acceptable? The murmur in the gallery was immediate. The judge raised a hand for silence. The lawyer's jaw clenched. I'm suggesting that emotions were running high, and sometimes that can lead to misunderstandings. Corbin let the silence stretch, then said, his voice slow, deliberate, You think I misunderstood getting punched in the ribs? Or was it the taser? Maybe it was when they dragged me across my own floor. The jury was watching him carefully now, their expressions shifting. The lawyer knew he had no ground left, but he wasn't ready to concede. You're a trained fighter, Mr. Thorne. Delta Force, Special Operations. That makes you dangerous, doesn't it? Corbin let out a quiet breath through his nose. Only to people who deserve it. The room stilled. The lawyer took a step back, his lips pressing together. No further questions. Shaw's hands twitched as he sat beside his lawyer, his face pale, his nerves fraying with every passing second. He had counted on the system protecting him, but he wasn't protected anymore. Vance, usually the louder of the two, sat stiff, his fingers clasped so tightly together that his knuckles had gone white. He wasn't making eye contact with anyone. They had known how this was going to go the moment Corbin had spoken his first words on the stand. The prosecution stood again, smoothing down her blazer. Your Honor, I would like to recall Officer Vance to the stand. A ripple of movement. Vance's lawyer whispered something urgently in his ear, but Vance didn't fight it. He stood, slow, methodical, walking the long, humiliating path to the witness chair. The prosecutor waited until he was seated, then she took her time, flipping through her notes before finally looking at him. Officer Vance. Former officer, Corbin murmured under his breath. Vance flinched. The prosecutor nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the correction. Former Officer Vance, she amended smoothly. Let's talk about your history with excessive force complaints. Vance's throat bobbed. The prosecutor cut him off. 17 separate complaints in the past 6 years, every single one of them dismissed. She looked at the jury. Would you care to tell us why? Vance swallowed again. I did my job. The prosecutor stepped forward, tilting her head slightly. Your job? Vance hesitated. Police work is dangerous. We don't always have time to... She cut him off again, her voice sharp now. To follow the law? Vance's jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. The prosecutor turned back to the jury. You know what's interesting? None of those complaints ever saw a courtroom, until now. Vance shifted in his seat, the weight of his downfall pressing in on all sides. The prosecutor let the moment breathe before her final question. Do you believe you are above the law, Officer Vance? His face twisted slightly. No. The prosecutor's lips curved just barely. Good. She turned back toward the judge. No further questions. Vance slumped back, his career, his reputation, his power gone. And then it was Shaw's turn. The prosecution wasn't kind to Shaw. They hit him harder than Vance because Shaw had been the one who pulled the trigger, the one who had killed Kaiser. The jury watched as the prosecutor played the body cam audio from that night. The cold, sharp crack of the gunshot, the sound of a dog's body hitting the pavement. The recording played the silence that had followed, the moment where Shaw could have backed down, where he could have admitted what he had done. But instead, they heard his voice. Dog shouldn't have moved. Corbin didn't look at Shaw, didn't even acknowledge him, because Shaw wasn't worth looking at. The prosecutor turned, her voice a quiet dagger. "Do you regret shooting Kaiser, Officer Shaw?" Shaw hesitated for too long, then finally he muttered, "It was justified." The jury hated him for it. The prosecutor nodded, slow and deliberate. "No further questions," the judge exhaled, rubbing his temple. "We will resume tomorrow for closing arguments. Court is adjourned." The bailiff banged the gavel, but everyone in that room already knew how this would end. Vance and Shaw were going to prison, and Corbin was going to watch them disappear. The courtroom was silent, not just quiet, dead silent. The kind of silence that felt like it had weight, pressing down on the room as everyone waited for the inevitable. The defense had collapsed under the sheer force of the evidence, the truth suffocating every last excuse Vance and Shaw had clung to, and now there was nowhere left to run. The judge shifted slightly, rubbing his brow, clearly exhausted by the circus this trial had become. But Corbin could see it in his expression. He had already made his decision. Before they got there, though, the attorneys had one last chance to speak. The prosecutor, a woman who had never once fumbled a question, stepped forward first. She didn't bother with notes, didn't need a script. Her argument was already written into the broken bodies, the stolen dignity, the years of unchecked brutality that had been dragged into the light over the past several days. She looked directly at the jury, her voice clear. "There are some cases that are complicated," she said. "Cases where the law is murky, where the truth is tangled, where the line between right and wrong is thin." A pause. "This is not one of those cases." She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping over the gallery, over the journalists, over Vance and Shaw, before finally landing on Corbin. "You have heard the testimony, you have seen the footage. You have watched over and over again as two men who were given power, men who were trusted to protect this city, used that power to destroy lives." Vance stared at the table. Shaw's hands twitched. "This is not about one bad decision," the prosecutor continued. "This is about a pattern of violence, a pattern of abuse, a pattern of corruption that was only stopped because one man refused to be silent." She turned back to the jury, her voice razor sharp. "You have the power to finish what Corbin Thorne started." She stepped back. That was it. No theatrics, no unnecessary words. Just the truth. The defense attorney stood, but he already knew he had lost. His argument was rushed, hollow. He tried to frame Vance and Shaw as victims of an overzealous system, tried to cast doubt where none existed, but his words were flimsy, weak, the desperate grasping of a drowning man. When he sat back down, he didn't look at his clients because he already knew their fate. The judge exhaled. "The jury will now deliberate." He banged the gavel. The room stirred as people stretched, murmured, whispered predictions. But there was no real suspense. Everyone already knew what the verdict would be. They didn't take long. Barely an hour later, the jury re-entered the courtroom. The judge asked if they had reached a decision. The foreman stood, a man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of justice. "Yes, Your Honor." He handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge read it, nodded once, and turned back to the room. "In the matter of the state versus Elias Vance and Kian Shaw, on the charge of excessive force," he glanced at the jury. "How do you find the defendants?" "Guilty." A ripple moved through the gallery. A quiet, sharp inhale from Vance. Shaw flinched but said nothing. The judge continued. On the charge of illegal search and seizure, guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, guilty. It continued, count after count, charge after a whole charge, guilty. Guilty, guilty. By the end, Vance's face had lost all color. Shaw was gripping the table so hard his knuckles had gone white. The judge let the weight of it settle before speaking again. I will now deliver the sentencing. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the bench. Mr. Vance, Mr. Shaw, you abused your positions of power. You violated the public trust. You brutalized the very people you swore to protect. And when confronted with your crimes, you did not show remorse. You showed arrogance. His voice dropped slightly, quieter now, more dangerous. I have no sympathy for you. Vance swallowed thickly, his face tight with something between anger and panic. Shaw shook his head slightly, as if still refusing to believe this was happening. The judge turned his gaze to the courtroom. The public has watched this case closely. They have seen firsthand what happens when men like these are given unchecked power, and it is my responsibility to ensure they never hold that power again. A pause, then finally. For the crimes of excessive force, aggravated assault, and attempted murder, I hereby sentence Elias Vance and Kian Shaw to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The room erupted. Some Pekawui gasped, some cheered, some sat in stunned silence, disbelieving that justice had actually been served. Vance sank forward, his head in his hands. Shaw's mouth fell open slightly, as if he had been expecting some last-minute reprieve that would never come. Corbin just watched. He felt nothing, not satisfaction, not joy, not triumph, just finality. They were done. They would never walk free again, never wear a badge again, never hurt another person again. And that was enough. The judge banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. As Corbin walked out of the courtroom, the cameras were waiting. Journalists rushed forward, shouting questions. Mr. Thorne, do you have a statement? Do you feel like justice was served? Do you have any regrets? Corbin stopped for just a moment. He thought about Kaiser, about the night in the street, about the cold silence that had followed, about everything it had taken to get here. He looked directly into the cameras, his voice steady. They got what they deserved. Then, without another word, he walked away. And for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't look back. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, just still, a place where time seemed to slow, where the weight of the past settled into the ground like roots, where voices from yesterday still lingered in the air. Corbin walked the familiar path, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, the late afternoon breeze cutting across his skin. He had been here before, but this time was different. This time there was nothing left unfinished. He stopped at the headstone, small, simple, but permanent. Kaiser, loyal to the end. Corbin exhaled, crouching down, running his fingers along the cool stone. "Hey, boy!" The words came out low, rough, almost hesitant. He let the silence stretch before he spoke again, his voice steady this time. "It's done." The wind shifted slightly, rustling the grass beneath his boots. He tilted his head, as if expecting Kaiser to be sitting there beside him, tongue out, tail wagging, looking up at him with that same quiet understanding he always had. "You were right about them," Corbin murmured, "right from the start. You knew what they were before I did, before I even realized how far they'd go." He let out a slow breath, his fingers tracing the engraved letters. "But I made them pay for it, Kaiser. I didn't just get justice. I took them apart, piece by piece, step by step. You'd have loved it." His lips twitched slightly, but there was no humor in it, just the cold satisfaction of knowing every single thing that had happened had been because of him. "I set it all up perfectly," he continued, his voice lower now. "Vance, Shaw, I didn't just beat them. I made them drown in it. I let them taste real fear for the first time in their miserable lives. I let them think they had a chance, Let them tell themselves they could get away with it. Let them try to crawl back out. His fingers curled into a fist, pressing lightly against the stone. And then I ripped it away. The words came out harder now, sharper, but not angry, just truthful. I made them feel weak. I made them feel small. I made them feel exactly what they put you through before they put that bullet in you. He leaned back slightly, rolling his shoulders. They never even saw it coming, not at first. They thought it was just bad luck, thought it was paranoia, thought maybe someone else was setting them up. And when they finally figured it out, a short exhale, almost a laugh. It was too late. His eyes drifted over the headstone again, fingers brushing absent-mindedly across the grass beneath it. "You'd have been proud of how I set it up," he murmured. "Every detail, every angle. I made sure there wasn't a single way out for them. I let them beat me. I let them think they were winning. And then, when they were comfortable, when they thought it was just going to go away, I destroyed them." His jaw tightened slightly, but not from regret. Because he didn't regret it. Not a second of it. "I made sure they'd never come back from it, Kaiser. I made sure they wouldn't just lose their jobs. I made sure they lost everything. Their reputations, their power, their freedom. They're going. To rot in a cell for the next 25 years, waking up every morning knowing exactly who put them there." Another long pause. He tilted his head slightly, picturing the way Kaiser would have sat, ears perked up, watching him with those sharp, trusting eyes. "Felt good," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "Putting them down like that felt real good." He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "But I guess that's not what you'd want to hear, huh?" The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of grass and dirt. The evening settling in, the sky stretching into deeper shades of blue. Corbin sat there for a while, just listening to the silence, to his own breath, to the part of him that had been so damn loud for so long, finally starting to quiet. "You'd probably want me to let it go," he muttered. "Move on." He sighed, running. A hand through his hair. "I don't know if I can, boy." The words came out softer this time, more honest. He wasn't a fool. He knew this wasn't some storybook ending where everything suddenly felt right again, where the weight disappeared, where the scars healed overnight. But he had done what he set out to do, and maybe for now that was enough. He reached into his jacket, pulling out the worn photo he had carried with him all these months. It was faded around the edges, but the image was still clear. Kaiser sitting beside him in the backyard, ears up, head tilted slightly, the sun catching in his fur. Corbin ran his thumb over it, then placed it gently against the stone. "I miss you," he said quietly. The wind picked up again, the sky shifting one last time before settling into dusk. He took a breath, deep and steady. Then he stood. One last look at the headstone, one last moment to let it sink in. Then finally he turned and walked away. And this time he didn't look back. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.